Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. You are listening to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson. I am your host, aka the voice of Fate. I just love that. Somebody named me that a couple of years ago. But I think that this is going to be one of my favorite interviews I've done in such a long time. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to let people know that it's starting to look like things are turning with this virus situation. I know that there are a lot of people still, New Orleans, that's starting to move toward the central of the country. Just do what you got to do. Take care of you, take care of your family, wash your hands, all those kindergarten things. Don't cough on people, don't spit, whatever. But take care of you. And I have a friend that if you would keep her in your thoughts, her name is Mary, and I'm very concerned for her. Enough said. If you could just please keep her in your thoughts. Now, before we get started, before I bring him in, I have to tell you that I met Michael Masters at the International UFO Congress last year. I thought he was amazing. I had never contemplated his premise until I heard him speaking of it. And I've got to tell you, you're going to be knocked out of the park too, because it is so logical. It is much more logical than anything else going in the field of ufology. And it's kind of easy to grasp and go, well, heck, why has this not been a premise? What everybody's working on. I don't know, but you're going to love the show. His work is immaculate. The citations are perfect. It was written for his peers. I think it's just absolutely great. I cannot say that enough. If you are not scientifically oriented like me, it was a little bit tough. But oh my gosh, only for the first couple of minutes. And once I got in the groove, it was excellent. So the book is Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. My guest is Dr. Michael P. Masters, and thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. I appreciate having me on, and I really appreciate that introduction. It was awfully nice.
Well, it's awfully true. When I first got your book, and I picked it up and I opened it, which I love the signature. Thank you so much for that. But I was just kind of like, oh, science. And that is not how my brain usually works to the level of your education. So
yeah, and that was one of the hardest parts about writing it is finding a balance between something that would not just appeal to my academic peers, but also something that they could read as if it was written by someone for them, and for an academic article, essentially a peer-reviewed journal article, but also to make something that's readable for everyone, because I wrote it for people in the UFO community just as much as my academic peers. So I think the way you summarized it was perfect, that it's a bit challenging, but kind of once you get into the groove, it's still readable, and I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I have been studying ufology for, several years now. I started with the anomalous topics in the spiritual side, ghost hunting, for lack of a better term. I like paranormal research and investigation better because I am a researcher. I like to visit locations and try different equipment and see what results I get, and see if there's some similarity in the environment or what reason there is when a device works well in a couple of places and just does nothing anywhere else when something else picks that up. And I think that what you have written is just right. When you start getting into the actual science, the physics, the quantumality. Is that a word, quantumality? We just coined that phrase. But
I think we did, yeah. It is now.
It is now. It was, I'm fascinated by that. So I was just totally immersed in that book. When you started, how did you actually, let me rephrase that. What caused you to even be interested in ufology? Were you at all other than from an anthropology point of view?
Yeah, I started taking an interest in it as in the first chapter of the before I was born, but
I'm sorry. Oh, it sounds like we are having a little bit of trouble.
Be interested in this question as a whole.
Hang on.
Is it breaking up?
It is. One of us appears to be getting a call. Let me hang up with you and call you right back, okay? Well, I think we're okay now.
Oh, you can hear me again?
I can hear you again.
Oh, that's strange.
That was strange.
I wonder if it's a wireless issue, but yeah, I'll try again. I was 8 years old. I don't know how much of that came through. I might have been breaking up for a while there, but my dad saw a UFO, kind of your classic bright light in the sky situation, and he was telling some friends about it that were over at our house, and I overheard the conversation, and just kind of piqued my interest. Like, I didn't even know this thing existed. I didn't know anything about the paranormal or really even that flying saucers were a real thing. Of course, I'd heard about them, but never really considered it. And then he bought a book called Communion by Whitley Strieber. And I remember looking up on the bookshelf and seeing it there, and had this image flash in my head of kind of a chimpanzee-like early hominin creature, a modern human, and then this alien form. And just kind of got me thinking if there could be a connection, if maybe they're simply us in the future after a long period of continued hominin evolution. So that kind of piqued my interest enough to know that I wanted to either be a physicist or an anthropologist, because I think both of those two fields are pretty important for this argument, and started out in physics and then eventually switched to anthropology.
Well, I think that your physics background shows up well in this book. And so does your gift for explaining those concepts. Actually,
it's challenging.
Well, it is, but the way that you kind of recognized that and knew that you were going to be speaking to a broad audience base, you really handled that well.
Well, thanks. And, I can't take all of the credit, because I did have some help from some peer reviewers, people that I think did a great job in sort of reining in some things that were a little too wordy. I tend to get a little chatty in my writing sometimes, and also some editors and some beta readers. So it went through 7 revisions before being published, and I think a lot of that I definitely owe a debt of gratitude to those individuals, both my academic peers and the students and the friends, and then obviously the editors as well. So yeah, it was important to me to have something that was approachable by a lot of different people, that would challenge them a little bit, like you said, but also make sense and be somewhat enjoyable to read, I would hope.
Well, it is. I'm going to just put that out there. Yes, that book is lovely to read. Now, when you actually began, you talked a bit about your 8-year-old experience, and it was amazing to me that you were able throughout your lifetime, before you actually started this serious research, to keep that in your mind, the chimpanzee, the human, the alien.
Yeah.
And, people are always talking about hybrids. I've actually seen a couple of people that I thought could be one.
Yeah. I've met a few people, too, that I think, you obviously have to separate the people that are genuine from those that are just pulling your leg, or, maybe a little bit schizophrenic or something. But I feel like I've met people who genuinely are as well.
Well, did you think so based on their mannerisms, their appearance, their behavior? What made you think that?
No, just mostly their precognition, empathy, the way they spoke about their most of them, to start with, had a long history of interaction with what I refer to as extratempestrials in the book, these time-traveling humans from our future. And they seem to share some characteristics with them in the context of how they're normally described, with, the telepathy aspect being a very dominant one. The ability to sort of sense things and know things, and some of them have even had that tested. They've proven their abilities. in that respect. So no, I guess, I mean, it's hard to know from looking at them physically. There might be certain traits that would show up, but it for me, it was mostly a cognitive thing, certain aspects of their personality and what they are able to do.
I saw someone years ago. I was at I think this was at the first Alien Con, but at any rate, there was a young woman, and she was wheelchair bound, who was so striking in her facial shape, her eyes, everything about her.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Looks like Whitley's alien.
Yeah. So she actually had those characteristics.
She did, the physical characteristics. Yeah. And she was beautiful.
That's interesting.
I mean, she was absolutely lovely. And I was walking with someone who pointed out that she looked that way, and they had been coming actually to speak to the person I was walking with. So I was kind of taken aback. And, you know, nobody there thought anything of it because it was at an event of people that believe or that really want to.
Right. Yeah.
Or they actually want something either way.
Yeah, and it's not a hard sell at events like that usually.
No, it's not.
People are pretty open-minded to start. Sometimes a little too open-minded, but no, that's interesting. So beyond the physical traits, were there other things that indicated that to you? I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but
It's okay. It's a conversation. I don't do Q&A.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, well, good. It was actually, it was the energy off of her.
Yeah.
You know, it was not, I'm very empathetic to people and their, it's not a vibe thing. I mean, I'm not woo-woo, but it's their energy.
Yeah,
and hers
absolutely.
was different than normal people. I don't mean normal people. I mean than the average person that you run into. She was totally normal and beautiful, and one of the best smiles I've ever seen. You know, it still stands out.
Right.
But she was definitely different.
Yeah, and that smile, I mean, a lot of energy comes through people's smiles and their eyes too, so that might have been part of it as well. Yeah, and I guess that's what I was trying to say too, is with these people who I've met, like it's an energy thing, and that the empathy, and there's been a lot of people who claim to have been abducted that come away with it, even without being hybrids themselves, who carry with them this sense of empathy and love for humanity that is really a powerful thing. And most of them describe it kind of fading after a while. But that experience of just being in contact with them and it transcending the individual, I think is pretty powerful. And if there is actually some sort of hybridization taking place, and as I always tell people, if there is hybridization just based on the biological classification of species concept, then they would have to be considered human, because we have we have this relationship where the classic example is the donkey and the horse. If the two mate, they interbreed, they can make a mule, but that mule's infertile, so we consider a donkey and a horse a separate species. But if we are actually interbreeding with these alien beings, then I think we have to consider their humanness, or at least some sort of relationship in the broader sense of the term. But even beyond that empathy, the transmission of knowledge, not just words in a telepathic sense, but feelings and emotions, and they're able to transmit a sense of calm in many respects. And I think all those things should be taken into account, because it gives us a deeper understanding of what really is going on.
Agreed. It's just one of those things that it's not. It shouldn't be so unusual, but it is.
It is, yeah.
I know abductees who have spoken with me. I've had someone on my show who was. And I used to have a very difficult time with that topic. Not because I doubted people, but because I felt like it was a little bit too close to home. You know, it was a little bit too serious, too, oh my gosh, you know, how do you defend against something like that? Which the answer apparently is that you don't. Right. And I had a hard time having those conversations. Now, it's just amazing to me. I have spoken with a couple of different women who experienced the missing fetus syndrome, I guess. And
oh, really?
And they have seen that child, or feel that they one knows that she has, one feels that she has. So, you know, that's when you start getting into the not science side.
Right. And there's a very human component to that. Absolutely.
There is. And it's very disconcerting to be, you know, a woman, a mother, and have that conversation.
Yeah. I read about that in the book. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say the first one was very open about it and had just written a book about her experience. The other had not mentioned that to anyone, and we were sitting at a conference talking, and I just said, "Have you seen that child?" And she just kind of looked at me like I'd grown another head, and she said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because I know someone who has interacted with hers, so I was just curious."
Yeah.
And
what did she say?
She said, "I have, but I haven't been able to interact. I just saw her watching me from across the street." So, I think that we just lost him. Let's go get him back. Hang on just a sec. Technology, it's a wonderful thing. There you are. It may be the topic. Hang on. Yeah, hang on just a... I know. Let me open our mics back up. He's here, y'all. I know y'all can hear me, but y'all couldn't hear him. Now you can hear him too.
Yeah, sorry about that. And you were just getting to the best part of the story too, and then my phone cut out. Apologize for that.
That's okay. I was just going to say that, you know, she just couldn't believe that somebody asked her that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and she had never told anyone. So I think I just kind of wigged her out a little bit, but she was one of the nicest people, and she was a speaker at the event I was attending. And I'm very blessed that I do get to go to those often as media and share from the event as well as prior to with the build-up and then follow-ups. But that was something that I hope to... I wouldn't discuss that with her on the air, but I'm looking forward to having a chance to talk to her again. I wouldn't want to make
learning more about it. Right. Yeah, I talk about that a little bit in my book too, because it's I think it's important to acknowledge that if that is happening, the emotional impact of something like that, you know, having a fetus removed or being reintroduced to a baby and told that was yours later on, that would be tremendously difficult. Obviously for a mother, I have children myself, so I could kind of understand that circumstantially, but I imagine it would be a really difficult experience. And it's, you know, it's hard because I mentioned that so many people do seem to feel a sense of love and empathy and have a very positive experience and really enjoy their contact with these extraterrestrials. But there are some who have a very negative response and feel like they and their family are being plagued by these encounters. And if something like that happens, it's definitely going to leave a mark and carry with it a lot of negative and difficult emotions. So, if it is research, if they're doing research, and certainly the abductions seem to mimic what we would do as anthropologists in the context of biomedical research. We're laid on a table, we're examined, we're probed, sperm samples are taken, eggs, fetuses, as we mentioned. The anal probe thing, you can learn so much from fecal matter, and we do as anthropologists too. We call them coprolites, just dried pieces of poop that give us so much information about the diet of past hominins. But all of those things are so similar to what I would do if I had time travel technology as an anthropologist that it definitely indicates a connection. But I think me and my colleagues would have a very difficult time with some of those aspects of it. And I don't know if that means the same research rules don't apply in the future, or the research or the outcome of what they're doing is so important that they're willing to sacrifice some people in the past. But I know I would struggle with that for sure.
Well, that's something else when you say that, their reason would be so extreme. Because your theory is that genetically they have homogenized so much that they're really not viable going on without having an infusion, as it were, of our current DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And
it takes
fascinating.
Yeah, it takes one aspect of modern human society and a current trend that's very observable. Really, ever since European colonialism beginning about 500 years ago, we're becoming one large interbreeding population. And prior to that, there were a lot of different groups spread all throughout the world. But beginning about 500 years ago, and obviously, small groups on boats that travel at slow speeds. But now with international air travel, up until recently, I guess, when we could get on planes and travel across the world, people are interbreeding with populations that were previously isolated. They were their own interbreeding groups. So if that continues into the future, it is likely that at some point we would just become one large genetically homogenized population on this island of Earth. And it does, not to get too technical, but if you have a situation of inbreeding and incest specifically, it tends to increase the frequency of what are known as homozygous recessive traits, the ones that cause a lot of the negative problems that we've observed for thousands of years, which is one of the main reasons why there are taboos against incest in every society throughout the world, and many other primates have rules against that as well. But if we get to the point where everyone is interbreeding on this planet, one of the only ways to get new genes to help with those problems might be to sample them from the past, and specifically certain individuals or groups that have genes that didn't make it into the future, which could potentially be why certain families are plagued by this more than others, that their genes have some value in the future because they are novel gene variants, essentially.
Well, that's something that I had noticed too with the experiencers that I have spoken with, is that it does seem to be family by family. It seems to run in that family unit. So I thought that was odd too until I was reading your work. And I thought, oh, well, there's something there that they're looking for.
Yeah, kind of makes sense in that capacity. And I would like to think that there's a lot of aspects of this theory that sort of explain certain aspects of the phenomenon. And not everyone has had an experience. Obviously, most of us haven't. But even for those who haven't, who read about these experiences of others, you do notice patterns after a while. And I think this time travel model does help fill in some of those gaps and explain some aspects of the phenomenon in ways that make sense. And as I always say, it's not mutually exclusive. It doesn't discount the extraterrestrial hypothesis or interdimensionality. In fact, this is a version of interdimensionality through the fourth dimension. the simulation hypothesis. I think we should consider all of these as potential explanations. And with something this mysterious, we should absolutely be open to any number of scenarios. But, I mean, if you look at it holistically, I do think that this time travel extratempestrial model helps at least offer some way of understanding some of the nuances of this phenomenon.
Well, I had a question in one of the groups that I shared this show to today who wanted to know, a gentleman wanted to know, that idea of people coming from the future, coming back here to do the research, gather evidence, and go back. Did you have any feel for how far in the future that would have to be given the biological and technical changes that would take?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I almost look at those as two separate things in the sense of the materials necessary, the technology, the knowledge, the engineering that would have to take place in order to return to the past. I don't think we're really that far off from having those abilities. I think that could potentially be, within hundreds of years, which sounds like a lot, obviously, but in the context of long-term hominin evolution, that's a blink of an eye, really. But to actually have the physical form, especially of these gray aliens with the large encephalized is the term we use, and another fancy word is globular neurocranium, a big round head. And our big round bulbous heads and our chins, our small reduced faces, are actually what define Homo sapiens sapiens as a specific group. And if those same trends continue and we continue to get rounder heads and smaller faces and less hair and bigger eyes, that I think is going to take a little longer. So your quintessential gray alien might be something like 8,000 to 10,000 years. But we might have time travel technology long before that. But if that's the case, you might expect that we wouldn't really expect to see people from our proximate future. If we still have records, if we still have archives, there might not be a reason to really go back and learn too much. If we had time machines now, we probably wouldn't go back 100 years ago. Certain people interested in history, I'm sure, would. But for the most part, we know what happened. So it might only be because we lose some record of the past, or there's some cataclysm, and or the gene sampling, as we talked about previously. Some of those things might factor into why certain individuals look different than us and others look very different. In fact, it might help explain the reptilian thing, or the insectoid type creatures, Manus man, Mothman, those types of things. If they're from a very, very distant point in our future, that they don't even look human to us anymore. We might recognize them as something more reptile-like because they're just so far removed from our current point in human evolution.
I thought that the praying mantis, when I saw an image of a praying mantis put up against somebody's perception of an alien, and I was like, well, I've never thought of that, but look at that head, look at those eyes.
Yeah.
It was startling. I happen to like praying mantises.
I do
walking
too.
Sticks, we used to call them. But
they definitely have.
I do need to let people know that they are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm so glad you are. I'm sorry. I have to do that station ID if I want to keep.
Well, don't be sorry if you have to do it.
I'm not really.
Obligatory.
I don't like doing it. I just had to interrupt you, and I hate doing that.
Oh no! All I was going to say is that if you're right, if you look at a praying mantis, they have big eyes and small pointy faces, and that is a general trend in recent human evolution. They don't really have much of a forehead, I guess, but for the most part, they resemble, at least in their facial anatomy, a little bit something human. Like the arms are way off. Our arms don't look anything like that. We don't have wings or thorax in the same way. But yeah, I don't know. I was having a conversation with Whitley Strieber recently, which was kind of fun for me because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, that's sort of what started all of this in the first place. But he was kind of reiterating that same idea that if I was mentioning it in the context of humans that are so far removed from us temporally, that are in our very, very distant future, that they look unrecognizable to us as humans. But he took it a little farther and said that maybe it's a post-human civilization where humans had been replaced by insects who gained the same level of intelligence, who also obtained time travel technology and are coming back from a post-human future, which I think is an interesting idea as well.
It is an interesting idea. I enjoy him. He's an interesting man.
He is. He's great. I like him a lot.
And he writes great books.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just had one come out, a couple months ago, I think it was.
Well, I was reading his updated Majestic a couple of months ago, and I put it down and I sent him a message. I was like, oh my gosh, this is outstanding. I said, so how many people came to call? And he was like, I got a lot of interest with that. I guess it was too well written because he portrayed it as fiction. I was just like, yeah, you should be careful with that. But I actually did a workshop with him some time ago, and he's an interesting speaker and teacher.
Yeah. So, yeah, he's very articulate, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you go to this premise, excuse me, of the time travel, and this is where I started getting in trouble. This is going to take the whole rest of the show for you to explain this. But the difference between linear time, right? Because we're taught that everything is linear. And theoretically, I guess it kind of has to be if you're going to keep records and such as that. How do they manage... How would the math work to be able to even contemplate something like that? I mean, they would have to be either somebody just tripped and fell over a rock and the idea was laying right there, or quantum just kept on going.
Yeah.
It blows my
well,
mind.
our obviously what we experience is linear. And nothing really challenges that, in the sense that we don't have currently, and never have in our past, any ability to turn back time, to visit the past. So it makes sense that that's what we know, and that's what we're used to, and that's how we conceptualize everything. But once we start thinking about it in the sense of connecting different points in time, it really isn't that complicated, and it actually gets around a lot of what we consider to be paradoxes. If we look at everything in the context of the dominant model in physics, which is the block universe, block time, also sometimes referred to as landscape time. And it's a pretty simple idea where all of the moments in the universe, from the very beginning of the Big Bang to the very last moments where matter exists in this universe, all of those things, the matter and the events that take place, are part of this one giant four-dimensional block of space-time, which is why it's referred to as block time. And in that sense, we don't necessarily have to think of things as a past cause and a future effect. You can have a future cause and a past effect, because those two moments are intricately linked across these different moments in block time. You can have something create something and create itself, which we think of as paradoxical, but it's not. You can have something create itself just by interjecting an idea or some technology into the past. And really the only paradoxes come from looking at it outside of this context where you could go back and kill your grandfather. In block time, we know that that's not possible. If it didn't happen, it never can happen and won't. So it actually is a simpler way of understanding all of these things. And one of a great way to understand it, a friend of mine named Leon Kirkbeck, who is a producer and also had this same idea about the UFOs, the aliens being us from the future. And he's explored this in various ways, as have many people who I've had the opportunity to talk to since publishing the book. But an analogy he likes to use is that if you think of like a movie reel, I think is what it's called. If you think of the ones they use in movie theaters where you have the movie playing through, it's being projected at that moment that you see on the screen, but all of it exists. There's the part that's already played in one reel, there's the part that's yet to be played in another reel, and then there's this concept of now, this moment where we see it and we say, well, that's what's happening now. But if you took all of that movie film out of those reels, you could connect two parts, a part from the future and a part from the past, and kind of put them together, bend them together. And you have those two moments taking place at the same time. And you can kind of think of time travel in that way too, where we still have this sense of the future, the distant future, in the context of this idea. And then the distant past, if we were to go back and pick up Homo erectus or a Neanderthal or something like that, we'd be connecting these 2 points in time as well. But there's really nothing paradoxical about that. You just interject yourself into those moments, even meeting yourself. We know if we got in a UFO right now and went back and met ourselves as a kid, you can be absolutely sure that when that kid grows up to be us at that moment, that they remember themselves, that we will get in that UFO and go back to meet what is now your younger self. So there's this self-consistency that exists, and specifically it's referred to as the Novikov self-consistency principle, and it's been looked at experimentally, and a lot of it's kind of become the dominant way of understanding these things in the field of physics.
That is just so interesting, because
and it didn't even take the rest of the show.
I know, right?
Say that
we're
was
not through yet.
No, I know, but I was hoping to do it somewhat briefly.
Well, you did it
very
well.
Well, I hope that makes sense. I hope it makes sense, because it really doesn't challenge our notions of reality too much. And a lot of what we see and a lot of the confusion, I think, comes from movies and TV shows that just bastardize what the reality of our understanding of time and space is. And it confuses us. But if you look at it in the context of how physicists understand it, it's really not that weird.
Well, it's really not. That was a very good explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I have to ask you, if you were going to go back in time, if we had that capability now, what period would you go to?
Well, there's a couple different places, times. See, I do it too. I just talked about time in the context of space, but those are different things. Mm-hmm. But if I went to a specific time, there's specific points in our evolutionary past that have always piqued my interest. I worked at some archaeological dig sites in South Africa and southern France and throughout Ohio and here in Montana as well. And to be able to see those cultures who were making and using the tools that I was digging up and the bones that we would find would just be amazing. So I would love to see those. But then there's also some really cool things that have happened, like just mind-blowing events in mostly geology. For instance, there used to be this massive lake, the size of the Great Lakes, not far from me in Missoula. It was called Lake Missoula, Great Lake Missoula, I think, something like that. And about, I think, 16,000 years ago, the ice dam that formed it gave way, and it just flooded this massive region throughout Washington State. The Scablands actually were formed because of this lake bursting. So if I could just sit there and watch that happen over the course of a couple days, something like a Great Lake draining over the course of 48 hours across the landscape, I think would be just a really cool experience, something that would be really fun to see, that you could only really get to see if you had that technology.
That would be amazing. But then I think about all the things that didn't know that was coming.
Right.
And then I'm like,
Well, fortunately, it was right before people got here. There might have been a couple of early tribes that were like, well, I guess it's our time to go, because you're not going to get out of the way of something like that. That's for sure.
No, not even close.
Yeah, it's something you'd want to watch from the air, not from the ground.
Not in front of it.
Mm-mm. No, definitely not.
Well, I think that I would like to go back to, I don't know if I would like to go back to shortly before the asteroid hit that they took the dinosaurs out.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be dinosaur bait.
No.
But I would like to experience dinosaurs from afar.
Yeah, especially if your time machine broke down and you got stuck there.
That would just totally be awful.
Well, but no, you're right. It would be pretty cool to just see that environment.
To see if they really have feathers.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough to imagine with all, I love dinosaurs. And to imagine a T-Rex feathered just blows my mind.
Yeah.
I would like
I'm not
just see that.
I'm not sure they were. I mean, nobody knows, but my understanding is that the ones like Archaeopteryx and some of the smaller dinosaurs that were starting to develop wings obviously would go on to become birds. And, you know, I look at a raven or our chickens. We have chickens. They look like weird little feathery dinosaurs too. But I think some of the bigger predators didn't, is my understanding. I obviously am not a paleontologist, but I think it was mostly the smaller raptors like that. I don't know. It's also pretty fun to imagine a T-Rex with feathers. That would be something pretty amazing to see.
It would be. I get tickled sometimes because I am a beach girl. I love the Alabama Gulf Coast. I like any coast. I've been on all of ours. But I think that I have a thing about pelicans and herons. But my husband's just like, why are you so in tune to pelicans? I mean, they're just like fishermen. I said, no, they are pterodactyls. Just look at them. You know, that's what they look like. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I raised my kids with that, and now anytime anyone sees a pelican in our family, they're like, ooh, pterodactyl. So we're a very strange family, but we have a good time.
Absolutely, and it's good for kids to get to know those things. I mean, so many people don't really get to know what our evolutionary history is and what came before us and how we got to be the way they are. So I think it's really important you do that. It's great that you do.
And it makes the learning a lot more fun. You know, if you can correlate something that's usually mundane and boring with something that you've seen, or you've got something close enough to have seen, you know, it's just, I love science centers and things of that nature, and I know that y'all must too.
Absolutely.
It just, to me, is a great way to have active learning as opposed to being preached to.
Right. And I grew up in Ohio, and we had this place in Columbus, Ohio called COSI. I don't remember what that was an acronym for. Probably Columbus something Science Institute, I would guess. But it was immaculate, this massive building with all kinds of, obviously Tesla coils and pendulums and magnets. And it was just so fun to go there. We'd take trips as a kid. And it is a great way to not just learn, but to pique kids' interest in things. Mm-hmm. When you see science in action, and you can put your hand on this Tesla coil and your hair stands up, and
I love that.
I know, it's
Even
awesome.
now.
It's yeah, me too. Me too. And it's really a good way to get kids interested in it, because you open up a book and you start reading about things and it can get a little boring. I think in a way YouTube is good for that too, just to see things presented in different ways and by different people, and it's easier to make it exciting when you can see things too, but it definitely isn't anything compared to the hands-on stuff.
Absolutely. We've got so many teachers, including you now, who are using the web as their classroom. And my daughter is at the opposite end of the spectrum from you. She is a 4-year-old pre-K teacher. She's part of that national program that came about trying to get kids a jump start really on school. And I am going to say that our state's program for the 14th year in a row is #1 in the nation. And I sent her a message. I was like, "Oh, congratulations to all of y'all, because look, you're #1." So
yeah, that's great.
In
the nation, you said too, right?
In the nation for 14 years.
Wow.
This program's been in operation, but really,
that's
we have
awesome.
such poverty and such here that it's really anything that we can do for those kids is fantastic. So
yeah, absolutely.
But she's having to use a classroom to work with people that their main thing is to learn to become like a team, right? To be friends and
right.
to have a learning environment together. And because basically what those people are teaching kids in that 4-year-old pre-K is what you're going to get the attitude from when they if they make it to you. So
yeah,
important stuff for the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most, definitely. It's one of the most important times in a kid's life is just getting it. Obviously, there's not a lot of information that you can absorb at that age, at least not complex math equations or anything like that. But you learn how to learn, and you learn ways to get information, and to the social development, interacting with other kids and building teams and collaborative networks. That's awesome. It's great that they're recognized for that too.
Well, it is. I think that's really terrific. And it's been really hard because this is the time of year that it's the fun time.
Right.
You've got all the orientation and the training and the hard work's in, and this is when you get to enjoy them until they get antsy to get out of school. And so all of them are missing that now.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of like, oh, this is terrible.
I know. My son got a really great kindergarten teacher, and was just starting to learn to read and, interact with his friends and, develop this relationship with this girl who he was really smitten on, and she liked him. And then, it all just came to a grinding halt.
And it was so sudden. Nobody could really prepare for it. And, it's just really an interesting moment in our global history.
It is. I like to refer to it as I mix up the terms from time to time, but current future human history, where we'll always look back on this as this really transitional period, or even if we don't transition much coming out of it, it was a tremendously impactful period. And I think, I think we're making history right now, and we get the sense that we're living through something that is really different and will always be regarded as an important moment in our past.
I know. I just think that it's so frightening. If you are, like, I have a friend that I haven't heard from for almost a week who was dealing with that disease, that illness. And, it's just kind of a pause in everybody's life to just kind of wait and see. And it's so frustrating. because you want to be able to help everyone, and there's really not a way to do that. And this would be a fantastic time for them, to come back here and say, oh, here, we've got this to fix that. Yes.
Right.
So, but they don't seem to really be all into that.
Well, who knows? I mean, maybe they started it. Maybe they gave this to us. I'm kidding, obviously.
I think that was a gift from, across the seas, but that's just...
Yeah, it wasn't. I really don't believe that.
I don't believe it was an
would
intentional
happen.
Gift.
Intentional, but honestly, we do need to think about that in the context of cross-temporal interaction. We have to do that now when we visit primate centers and we work with chimpanzees, especially because we share more than 98% of our DNA. We have to worry about not just getting diseases from them, but giving them our diseases that could be really impactful because we're so similar genetically that the same sorts of pathogens will affect them and us. So yeah, it's definitely something, if we are traveling through time, that we would need to be aware of too. Disease transmission across different time periods could be an issue. And I said that in jest, but in order to make this point, that it is something that they would have to consider and we should consider as well. But given that they are so far advanced, you would expect that they wouldn't really have to worry about that as much, that they would know what their pathogen load is and whether or not they are able to communicate something to us, any sort of virus or bacteria. But it is a potential issue. It's funny because I never put anything about that in the book, and it's one of many things that after I published it, somebody mentioned. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You'd think I would have thought of that and put that in the book, but didn't even cross my mind. That's why I call this an evolving project, because there's so many things that I obviously don't know and can't know that, and the more I talk, it's been such a blessing to write this and be able to talk to so many people about it. And for me to continue to have an open mind too, and have people share with me their thoughts on it. And there's a lot of things that I overlooked that I wish I would have put in the book, but didn't. But, there are things that come up later.
Yeah, exactly. That's all hindsight. Next book.
Well, it is the year 2020, so maybe that'll be the title of the next book.
There you go. Oh, that would be good. Absolutely.
It seems fitting. I'd have to get on that, though, because I'd have to publish it by the end of the year, or it's not really relevant.
That would be tight.
Yeah, it's a tight window.
Well, we are about to take our top of the hour break, but I was, when we come back, I would like to discuss the actual writing of this, and I have some other questions going back to the technical side. So it's going to be
sounds great.
It's going to be fun because some of these things I think I got my mind around, and some of them I think that I would enjoy a little bit more detail.
Sure.
So that I can.
Yeah, sounds great.
But we will be back, guys. It is probably about 5 minutes. This is the news break, so if we're actually really fortunate, maybe we can get a little good news tonight. We're getting to the point that we're about due. So just hang in, and we will be right back right after this. Y'all come back too.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. The Small Business Administration will resume accepting loan applications for its Paycheck Protection Program tomorrow morning. As NPR's Joel Rose reports, the Trump administration is warning that unemployment will still hit levels not seen since the Great Depression.
The next few months are going to be, quote, terrible for economic data. That's according to White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett. He says the unemployment rate could hit 16%.
Because we have the highest unemployment rate we've had since the Great Depression, probably, then we're going to need really big, thoughtful policies to make it so that people are optimistic again and they start the economy again.
Hassett told reporters that there are still reasons to be hopeful for a quick recovery, especially if the White House can reach a deal with Congress on another stimulus package. But most economists are more pessimistic, with a record 26 million Americans seeking unemployment benefits over the last 5 weeks. Joel Rose, NPR News.
Tyson workers at a Springdale, Arkansas meatpacking plant are demanding safer working conditions during the coronavirus pandemic. But as Jacqueline Froelich with member station KUAF reports, the company insists protective measures are now in place at all of its facilities.
3 U.S. Tyson food processing plants have been shut down so far during the pandemic. The company will not say how many workers across all 123 facilities have tested positive. Tyson spokesperson Hector Gonzalez says workers are being screened and provided masks.
There are now dividers between the workstations made of plexiglass and other materials meant to serve as a barrier.
Nearly 200 employees last week submitted petitions asking for safer working conditions at their Springdale facility. They say the plant should be shut down and workers quarantined with pay if anyone tests positive. For NPR News, I'm Jacqueline Froelich in Fayetteville.
Many states are working on reopening their economies, including Georgia and Florida. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo says he has a plan for a gradual reopening of businesses in that state. Alex Crichton of member station WXXI has more.
Cuomo has presented a broad outline of a reopening plan for New York, but any plan should wait until state and regional hospitalization rates for coronavirus have declined for 14 days per CDC guidelines. Cuomo says they're monitoring both, but the gradual phasing in of businesses depends on whether people continue with the policies that have reduced the number of cases.
Alex Crichton reporting. In Israel, the country's embattled health minister says he's stepping down after a public uproar about his handling of the pandemic. Health Minister Yaakov Litzman says he will take over as construction minister once a new government is formed. Israel has more than 15,000 cases and nearly 200 deaths from COVID-19. You're listening to NPR News from Washington. More than 8 months after a mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, the last person still hospitalized in that attack has died. Guillermo Garcia was fundraising for his daughter's soccer team in front of the store when he and his wife were shot. She survived. His death raises the toll from the attack to 23. The alleged gunman, 21-year-old Patrick Cruces, remains jailed and is awaiting trial on federal hate crimes and state murder charges. Countries around the world are strategizing on how and when to open their coronavirus-shuttered economies. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has upped the reward for any citizen finding a vaccine against the virus to the equivalent of $1 million. He's also prolonging stay-at-home orders for millions of Filipinos. NPR's Julie McCarthy reports.
On Friday, President Duterte extended the quarantine of metropolitan Manila and other areas by 2 weeks to May 15th. But despite the protracted lockdown, there has been a surge in cases. 48 hours after lengthening the quarantine, the Philippines reported nearly 300 additional cases Sunday. Deaths from COVID-19 have climbed to over 500. As testing ramps up, more cases are detected, but experts say there are not enough diagnostic kits. And the coronavirus has also highlighted a serious shortage of nurses in the country. The Philippines has long been the world's leading supplier of nurses. Some 150,000 work in the United States, where they typically earn salaries far greater than they would at home. Julie McCarthy, NPR News.
And I'm Janine Herbst, and you're listening to NPR News from Washington.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, Walden University. Are you looking to create change in your community? A doctoral degree from Walden can help you release your greatness and make a bigger impact on a local, national, or global scale. Become more. Visit waldenu.edu/doc.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour. Welcome back for the second hour of Fate Mag Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I am Kat Hobson. I'm your host. I am so glad that you are here. We have had so much fun. My guest tonight is Dr. Michael Masters, who has written just a fantastic book. It is Identified Flying Objects, a Multidisciplinary Scientific Approach to the UFO Phenomenon. And I'm going to tell you that it is provocative. And if you go and look him up on Amazon, you can buy his book there. You can also buy it from him. But it's, I'm going to read this blurb if that's okay with you, Mike, so they'll know just how
Yeah, of course.
much fun this is. It says, could UFOs and aliens simply be us, but from the future? This provocative new book cautiously, not so cautiously, Mike, examines the premise that extraterrestrials may instead be our distant human descendants using the anthropological tool of time travel to visit and study us in their own hominin evolutionary past. And the idea was brilliant. I don't know why I hadn't really considered this before reading your book, well, meeting you and then reading your book, but it's so interesting. I mean,
it's been fun for me too, because I've met so many other people who have also had this idea, and I think I mentioned that briefly earlier, talking about the producer friend of mine who he actually has a really good show on Spotify called Aliens Like Us. He's the co-host of it with an actor named Rhys Darby. Both of them are from New Zealand, and they've put together a really interesting show about UFOs and aliens. And but yeah, it beyond him and them, there's been so many people and so many things I've come across that people have told me about since publishing that stretch back decades, where people have been arguing the same thing, that they're maybe just us from the future. So it's been really cool to see that.
Well, I was not familiar with that premise. So to me, this was all brand new. I had thought, personally, I had thought, well, they don't look dissimilar, especially the taller aliens. And I've spoken with people that tell me that sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're green. Then you have the grays, then you have Nordics and reptilians and all these other species. But we don't all look the same around the globe.
No, we don't. That's true.
It's just it's an interesting concept. But
yeah, that's a good point too, that we don't look the same now. So we would expect our future human descendants to not only look different than us, but to also look different from each other. And as I mentioned earlier in the show before the break, that could partly be because of them coming back from different time periods, what I refer to as temporal ancestry in the book, in the same way that if we went back 10 years or 100 years, we'd look exactly like everybody at those times. Obviously, our technology and our style of dress would be different, but if we go back 300,000 years or 1 million years, now we don't only look different, but we're the ones with the big round heads and the small faces and the light skin and less hair. Like, we are exactly what's described in the context of these extraterrestrials, just in a more exaggerated form of these same traits. So it could be that temporal ancestry part, or it could potentially be the continuation of the same general racial groups. We don't use the term race anymore because it's not a valid biological concept, but it could be the continuation of these same ancestral differences that we see today, just projected into the future. So yeah, we would expect them to not just look different from us, but to look different from each other as well.
Would it be a stretch to go from us to a reptilian style?
I mean, it depends. It depends. Like, to get to a point where we had teeth and scales like reptiles do, or I guess scales are on fish, but that rough skin, eyes that are shaped differently, pupils and irises that are different. I think that would be a pretty big step. I don't know I don't know how long it would take for us to develop traits like that, if it would happen at all. And I think it's also important to point out that for a lot of people who have abduction experiences, what they describe in many cases are what's oftentimes referred to as an imprint, where they can tell that what they're remembering, probably not what actually happened, but they're clearly able to manipulate our memory of things, because most people who have an abduction experience remember bits and pieces, but their conscious memory of it is usually masked or clouded in some way. And through hypnotic regression, they're able to get a little bit more detail. But many describe having sort of like carnival characters or Disney characters who, especially as kids, once they're abducted as kids, describe that, in my opinion at least, and oftentimes they'll say the same thing, to ease the burden of it, the mental anguish that would come with something like being kidnapped essentially in the middle of the night as a small child would be horrific. So they either implant this memory or they're able to mask their identity with these characters. So there's the possibility that the ones who remember a reptile-like creature, it could potentially be that same sort of imprinting, or it could potentially be a very distant point in our future, or something completely different. It could be an extraterrestrial being. I'm definitely not in a position to say. These are just some potential things
on,
that
man.
I've...
You know you've got their whole genetic code stuck somewhere. But
yeah, I mean, the best I can do is offer up some potential explanations, but yeah, I don't know, to be honest. And I think it's important that when we don't know something, we say that outright.
Oh, absolutely. Please. It's amazing how people don't do that. Yeah. Just like when they don't.
In academia too, like we're guilty of that more than anyone else. We get stuck in this mindset, this confirmation bias about specific things, and we just don't want to let go. And I've seen that happen in the UFO community too, especially in writing this book, challenging the extraterrestrial hypothesis to some extent. Like I said, they're not mutually exclusive, but still offering something that is divergent from this overarching model of extraterrestrial beings. I've seen some level of pushback because of that.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, it hasn't been like, people knocking on my door with baseball bats and torches or anything.
So far. We'll keep it that way.
So far, yeah. Yeah. But there's definitely been some grumpiness on behalf of certain individuals, especially those with very dogmatic views or ones who have built a career around this idea of extraterrestrial beings. It's not something that they necessarily want to challenge that model, because it's a big part of their brand. Ancient Aliens is a good example of that. I've been on that show 3 times in this season, and not once has anything been mentioned about time travel, even though, it's a big part of what I do. It's great that they had me on. I think that's it's an interesting show. It has some good entertainment value. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if they start to acknowledge this as a viable hypothesis as well. Because even when they're just talking about aliens, they use the term extraterrestrial. Like if you listen to, they say that 10, 15 times throughout the show. Could it be extraterrestrials? Ancient aliens theorists say, well, yeah, obviously.
Robert is so good at that with the voiceover.
Yeah, no, it's an iconic brand, and I think they're trying to stay true to their brand, and there's so many other people are too. So, yeah, when you come along with a book that offers up another explanation for the origins of this phenomenon, and it doesn't fit neatly into the brand and what they've been peddling for so long, then yeah, it's something that's a bit contentious.
Well, it is very contentious because it's an interesting concept in that people want there to be extraterrestrials because if there's another species, another culture out there that's more advanced than us, right? Then there's always the possibility that there's someone who can come and rescue us from ourselves.
True, but we could be rescued.
To the planet, from what we're doing, to each other, from being
right,
less
but that
than
could
what
come
we should
from
be.
the future. That could come from the future too, and you'd think they would care more. They would have more of a stake in what we're doing here to ourselves on this planet if they are our descendants who are also living on the same planet and who care about what it looks like for them in the future.
Yes,
but no, I definitely agree that the extraterrestrial thing provides some comfort too, that we don't want to feel like we're just floating through space on this rock all by ourselves, that there has to be something else out there. And there no doubt is. There's absolutely other life forms and other planets. The fact that it happened here so early on in the history of this planet, after it could sustain life, after we had an atmosphere and liquid water, it certainly happened other places. But I think in the context of this phenomenon, the vast majority of it, at least, may lend itself more to an extratempestrial explanation.
Well, I think so too. It seems so much more logical because that doesn't rule out other species from other places, hence reptilians versus grays versus greens and blues and Nordics and all the rest. But, those would be different things that would come through, I feel like, the genetic code. That would be why some look more like actual humans versus alien humans. Does that make sense?
Definitely, yeah. And especially those insects and reptiles like we talked about earlier.
Yeah. I don't know that I would want to see a praying mantis as big as me, but it's it's a thought, right?
Yeah, that would be really scary. That's when I would want some Mickey Mouse imprints if they are actually all praying mantis looking creatures.
Yeah.
Definitely give me Scooby-Doo or something instead.
My daughter used to be terrified of Scooby-Doo because she would always fall asleep before the monsters were revealed to be people. So,
yeah, right.
Because it was at night.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't see that last 5 minutes, then you'd have a very different perspective of that show.
It's a very different experience.
I never thought about that.
Yeah,
that's funny.
One of the things that I found interesting, and this is kind of a, dog leg on you here, but you wrote something that I found interesting. The arrow of entropy and the arrow of time. This section was something that I really enjoyed because this is some of the science that was a little beyond me to start with. Okay, that's when I was starting with the linear path. But you wrote that we take for granted that time has a given direction and physicists don't. Most natural laws are time reversible, which means they work just as well if time was defined as running backwards. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you say in the dimension of space, you can move forward and back, like commuters. But time is different. It has a direction. You always move forward, never in reverse. So why is the dimension of time irreversible? And, have you solved that yet? Are you a world famous physicist on top of anthropologist and you've got all of that? Because that's actually a fantastic question, and I bet it does drive physicists nuts.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, but it also, I think if you look at it as a separation between the physical aspects of the universe versus our conscious understanding of time and consciousness in general, then it's not really that different. Because, when physicists say that any of these processes make just as much sense running backward to forward or forward to backward, that's true. There isn't really temporality in the context of physics, but you can't really imagine any situation where everything we're doing is going backwards, and how we perceive those things violates obviously laws of entropy, but also our notions of reality in a very strict sense. And we learn this very early on, like how we were talking about things that we learn in pre-K and kindergarten. One of the big ones, and I mentioned this briefly in the book, is putting things in order. Mm-hmm. You have all of these things. Kids have to I do this with my child all the time. You cut them out, you put them in order. So we learn that to an extent, but it also has to make sense to us. What we see around us has to make sense. Where if I'm chasing this animal and I throw this thing at it or shoot a gun at it, that it'll then fall down and I can eat it. And, like going back to the very beginnings of life, we had to make sense out of the environment around us. So part of our consciousness is centered on this notion of linear time. So I think we have to separate that from the physical aspects of the universe. And if we traveled into the past, we wouldn't see things run in reverse. That's a common misconception. Everything would still move forward for us in our local reference frame. So if the UFO is the time machine itself, within that frame of reference, everything's still moving into the future. We're still moving forward at the same speed. We're just going into the global past. So when we get out of our craft, we see our hominin ancestors, or possibly ourselves if we went to visit ourselves. But we're still experiencing time moving forward. It's just that we have moved globally into the past. So I think it's important to separate it in the context of a time machine, what we'd actually see. But it's also important to separate it in the context of physics and our conscious perception of time, because how we perceive time is different than what the physical laws of the universe are.
Interesting. Well, I'm disappointed because my favorite episode of The Big Bang Theory was when they got the time machine, and when Leonard got in it, everybody started moving backwards.
Oh, no. So. See, that's what I mean. You can't trust these people. You can't trust producers to actually do a good job, because they just do whatever they want. And it pisses me off, like Marty McFly's not going to start disappearing because his parents didn't get it. That's not how that works. And there are exceptions, like the show Dark. It's a Netflix show. And it's out of Germany, but they do a tremendous job of sticking to the actual rules and the laws of physics as they pertain to time and time travel and what would happen. And I think it's one of few that does this, but they do a really good job. And I wish all of them did, but it doesn't always lend itself to a good screenplay, unfortunately.
Well, I am going to go check that out because, I'm just so interested in the actual how-tos, how that would work. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are a lot of people that we both know who are working on some really seriously rocking propulsion systems and doing that kind of research, trying to get where we can go forward, get mm-hmm. out there and see things. And I know that teleportation has actually already been tested successfully on at least single cell organisms. I don't know if that's gone further than that yet or not. I know it was in process. But I think that everybody is working toward a Roddenberry future as opposed to it's us coming back. It's us that came back and locked down that missile silo at Minot to prevent...
Maelstrom?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that's not far from here. Maelstrom Air Force Base.
Thank you. And, it just seems like if it were us coming back, maybe there would have been something already done or something left to teach us what to do about Fukushima and things of that nature, which I consider that, if they don't figure it out, to be an extinction level event. Yeah. And, and we have all of these nuclear reactors in twos going all down the Atlantic coast of Florida and river systems throughout the country mm-hmm. and stuff. they haven't brought those offline which I think they should have done until they can figure out how to contain a situation like that.
Yeah, you'll definitely like that show then, that dark show that I mentioned, because they bring a lot of that into play. It mostly centers around a nuclear reactor and a nuclear, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a big part of how and why all of these things happen. And yeah, if you're interested in what would actually happen, not just what some producer came up with or some screenwriter, but what would actually happen, it stays really true to the facts. It's entertaining. It's actually really well made.
Well, I've already written it down, and I'm planning on catching that. Is it a movie or a series?
It's a series.
Cool.
They've done 2 seasons so far. It's dubbed over because it's out of Germany, like I mentioned, but you don't even notice the dubbing after a while, and you don't have to read subtitles or anything. It's a really good show. I think you'll like it a lot.
I will. But, that is something that when that happened, shortly after it, a couple of years ago, we had 2 Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricanes coming in to the U.S. on that coastline. And I was concerned. I mean, I'm sure that the seismic activity weakened things, and then the flooding was the icing on the cake with Fukushima. But, it's just as... I would really appreciate if they would come and fix that, or tell us what to do. Maybe it's not fixable. Maybe we have to figure that out. But
and some things have to happen too. I mean, bad things have to happen.
They do.
If we were always, you do, and if we were always, and you could use this as a metaphor with our own lives. And looking at our own timeline as individuals, maybe somewhat analogous to doing it on a species-wide level over many thousands of years. But you can always think back to, a car crash or a bad grade you got because you forgot to study, or any number of situations, and think, well, if I had just done that differently, what would have happened? If I could go back and change anything, I would have changed that. And then, there would have been this other outcome. But bad things have to happen. Good things happen. Bad things happen. There's kind of this balance of energy. Yeah, and everybody experiences that. And we may be experiencing that on a species-wide level too. But in the context of backward time travel, the only way you really get paradoxes is if you try to think that you could change the past, that there is some alternate outcome. And the paradox comes because if you went back to change something, say you went and talked to yourself before this car crash, and so it didn't happen, how would you ever know as that future version of yourself to go back in time and tell yourself? Because now that never existed. There was no motive. There was no reason to get that ability, that technology to go back and do that. But there is consistency across time and space with visitations across time. It's just when we get a sense of how we change things that it becomes paradoxical. So I try to adhere to the block time model, and obviously in the book I did as well. There is, however, with that said, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that the way of viewing that is that there are different timelines. So if you go back and you say, hey, don't get in the car, don't go down that road, you've now created a separate timeline in which that crash didn't happen. But now, how do you get back to that future? And if you go to that future, is everything completely different? Because that crash was supposed to result in these other things that happened. So another way of viewing it is the many worlds interpretation, where there are alternate timelines, but it's still paradoxical in the sense that you may not be able to get back to your timeline because that exists in a different dimension as it's viewed under that model.
Touche. Okay. Well, I do need to let people know that y'all are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. And this is Fate Mag Radio. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, with my guest, Michael Matthews. Dr. Michael Matthews. Sorry about that. So, when you're trying... I wouldn't want my timeline changed. But I do think that I don't really have any reason for thinking this other than finding it interesting and wondering who's going to come up with the actual research on it. But like multidimensional, that would feed in with the multiple timelines, right? Or it could.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the big parts of the model, is that there's all of these infinite universes, and a lot of it comes down to quantum decoherence. So when we observe things, it leads to decoherence. It's thought, at least under this model, to result in a split where you have different timelines that arise out of that moment. So that quantum superposition of states, where you have, say, an electron with positive and negative, or a spin this way and a spin that way, when it separates, those two states of being just go into their own universe, essentially. And in going back in time, it's thought to be one of these things that would cause that decoherence to happen, where you would have that split take place, and then you would have these alternate timelines. And it's an interesting model. It's not one I talked about in the book very much because, as I mentioned, the dominant worldview, or the dominant model among physicists, is that of block time and the block universe, as we've been discussing. But it is out there. It's been around for 40, 50, I think it was the 60s when that was first proposed. So it's actually been around for a while. There are some issues. Some people think it could never actually be tested because it involves trying to observe things that take place in other dimensions, which may be impossible to ever measure things in other dimensions. But it also helps people feel better about the issue of free will, because if everything is structured in a specific way and it happens to unfold from past to future in the same way I described earlier with the movie reels, for instance, then that means the future is already laid out. We're just going through the process of doing these things in a specific way. But in the context of the many worlds interpretation, then there can be other outcomes. There can be other things that take place. But regardless of how you view it, there is only one outcome. When we look back at our lives from the end, we see this one chain of events, this one long line of things that led us to that point in our lives. So if there were other outcomes, we're not even aware of them in the context of our conscious perception of the past.
When I was reading that about the free will, I actually think that's just an illusion. But things happen that affect your ability to be able to have free will and exercise it.
Yeah.
Without even going into the physics and the timelines of that. So I liked how you handled that. Because I did know that was a tough iffy thing.
Yeah, well, I didn't either until I published the book. And then it turns out people get really pissed off about that for some reason. And it doesn't bother me at all. I'm perfectly happy with things having outcomes that are the way they were always going to be. But it turns out some people really don't like that. I remember doing some interviews early on after the book came out, and getting the equivalent of hate mail, I guess, and emails. And it's not even my idea. It's just what the most predominant view of space and time is among physicists and many philosophers and historians. And it was just, don't shoot the messenger kind of thing. It wasn't my idea. It was just me writing about how it is viewed. Yeah, sharing an idea with people. So I was surprised to see that, but no, it does. It strikes a chord with certain people, and they have a very emotional connection to this idea that we control everything and every outcome. But to me, I almost feel more comfort in the way it actually is, or the way we think it is. That it's all just just going to happen the way it's going to happen. I thought it'd be interesting to do a study where you show people this concept of block time at different ages. So like 15-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and see what their reactions to it are, or how accepting they are of this view. Because I think that younger people would be more against it, and older people would be able to look back at their lives and say, well, yeah, I mean, that was my whole life. There was only one outcome. But I don't know. I think that might be harder for younger people. I think that would be an interesting study to do.
I think it would too. And, I would agree that you would find quite a difference in the reception from those two different age groups, because I'm in my 50s. And I completely feel that everything happens the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
You can fight the flow. You can rebel against the flow. You can rebel against your concept of what you think you want to be versus where your path is going.
Right.
And so I do think you
and then
see that difference.
If you rebelled against it, well, maybe that's what you were always going to have done in the first place. Maybe that was your path, and you just had this sense that it was something different. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to our perception too, and it's good to hear you say that, because I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's anecdotal, I guess, that we're talking about it in the terms of how we feel about it. I think it would be cool to do some sort of survey or a scientific study to see statistically if there is a difference, because I kind of have a feeling that there would be. I think a lot of it's just perception.
Well, to me it's just fascinating, because when I was younger, I was just like these people who were on the beaches in Florida and stuff, right? I'm young, I'm immortal, this isn't going to bother me.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, they're home. People around them are sick. They're sick. Everything is going south. And, all because that's what we want to do. And I do feel for them. I mean, they were being booted out of their dorms. Their lives were changing. They weren't going to be able to go back to school. Nobody knew what was happening. And the Superman, self-image rose up. And they paid for that. A lot of them did. And, was that going to be their path all the way along? One would think. But it still is hard to grasp sometimes that you don't really have control. And I think that's why there's so many control freaks in the world, because they're trying to.
That's a good point, too, is that when we're young, it's not just about viewing the rest of our lives as being this thing that's open and we control it and we change it, but we're also, we also are just control freaks as humans. And maybe, certain cultures, you'd have to account for that in the study, that certain societies might not view their own existence that way. But, when you're a kid, you feel invincible. And you're right about everything. Your parents and everybody else are wrong. You know it all. And we just rebel against everything.
Like you are, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's true. It would be kind of a confounding variable in the study, that we'd also have to account for some of those things, upbringing and where you grew up, whether you were rich or poor. Like affluent people might feel that they control everybody and everything, including, their own path and their own outcomes. So they definitely have to control for some other variables. That's for sure.
It would be fun. It would really be interesting to see that. I am going to address something else with you. When you were talking about the extraterrestrials, they're a lot like us. They communicate with us in our own language. They're, telepathic with that. They have, this was something I really liked. They possess technology advanced beyond, but clearly built upon our own. We have a question in chat that she wants to have an idea of how this whole time travel thing works. What are your thoughts on how that could actually happen? But I'm interested, too, in the fact that clearly built upon our own. That's interesting. It's just another point added in.
Yeah, and those two questions go together pretty well, because how we would do it, obviously we're not at that point yet, but it's not just speculation either, because if we look at all of the research that's been done since Einstein published his theory of general relativity in 1915, and specifically his 10 field equations that went along with it, it was shortly thereafter that Lenz and Thüring in 1918, Van Stockham, Gödel, Tipler, you probably remember some of these names from the book, kept demonstrating over and over that if you have the rotation of a massive or highly energetic body, because energy and mass are essentially equivalent, equals mc squared, then you're able to create frame dragging and rotation of space-time. And what that does, why that's important, is it allows you to tip over light cones. And a light cone is just all of the things that can happen, because the other part of that equation, c squared, the speed of light, is a limiting factor in what can happen at any point in time. You can't travel faster than light. So if you think about turning on a flashlight, it's sending out this beam, and within that radiating beam of light, it kind of forms a cone, and that creates this shield of everything that can happen. It must exist within that cone. But in the rotation of a massive or energetic body, and initially it was cylinders, and then spheres and even disks more recently, have been shown to bend those light cones over. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, you're still moving into the future locally, but if your light cones bend over, you can move into the global past. You're moving into the future, but going backward in time. So, and that also ties into why I say build upon our own, because these UFOs, which I argue are the time machines themselves, have the form of something that's very much consistent with how all of these physicists have been describing how we would create these closed time-like curves by bending those light cones over and going into the past with this technology that would seem to be the direct result of what these same physicists have been describing and calculating since 1915 with Einstein's general theory of relativity. So it kind of, as far as how we would do it, you know, it's going to be a long time before we really work out the details of that, I think. But if we look at how we understand it now, based on past research, it would seem to be that these UFOs are just a continuation of those same that same research that's been done since 1915.
That is so interesting. Because I was thinking, until I read through here, I was thinking that it was leaning more towards magnetic fields as opposed to, just with the discs. So this is actually new to me.
Well, when I say highly energetic, I'm referring to the electromagnetic spectrum. So yeah, you're right. It is, I think, magnets, essentially, electromagnets. Because as I mentioned, the electromagnetic force is 10 to the 40 times stronger than gravity. So that would help understand the propulsion system, because if something is 10 to the 40 times stronger than this force of gravity, which we think is strong, you fall off a ladder and come crashing down, you're like, whoa, gravity sucks. Like that's a pretty strong force, but it's really not. It's the weakest of all of the different fundamental forces in the universe. So if we can use the electromagnetic force to propel these craft at these speeds, we might also be able to use it to warp space-time. And that might also help explain the tremendous G-forces that are experienced or at least as we perceive it, that would be experienced when this craft just instantly darts up in the sky or zips off in that direction or this direction. If they are actually manipulating time within that craft, within that localized reference frame, as they move to them inside that craft, it may seem like a slow acceleration where they're just kind of going off in this direction. But to us, in our reference frame, it seems like something that would smash our skulls against the top of the UFO from the inside, because it's such a tremendous speed, and the G-forces associated that would be mind-boggling as well. Actually, a physicist, Jack Sarfati, has just he's been arguing that for a while too, and just had a paper recently, or an article published with regard to the Tic Tac, the USS Nimitz encounter specifically, showing that one of the only ways that it could move in the way that it was observed moving would be if it was controlling time, in addition to the forces that were repelling the gravitational force.
Well, just to be clear, Sherry says, have you ever tried to time travel, since you obviously know all about it? So my response was, can't yet, still theoretical. So would that answer be correct?
Kind of. I guess the answer would be kind of, because you're right. I can't physically travel into the past because we don't have that technology yet, the materials alone that would be required to withstand the centrifugal forces. Because if something's spinning or has to maintain, that level of energy or acceleration, would have to be built out of something that we clearly don't have those materials yet. The engineering, knowing what properties of each would be required to go 10 minutes into the past or 10,000 years into the past, I think all of that's going to take a while to figure out. But with that said, I have tried time traveling like in a conscious sense, like with consciousness, because I don't feel that our consciousness necessarily is bound to the physical world in the same sense. I feel like, especially in dream states, like I've seen many things from the future that eventually came true in my own future that were essentially memories from a point in my life where I was going to be doing those things, but I was able to see them in a dream state. So that indicates to me that there is potentially, and this is all just anecdote, potentially our consciousness isn't necessarily bound in the same way that our physical bodies are. And in that sense, I have tried to time travel before. I've tried to send information to myself in the past. And, potentially this whole thing that happened when I was 8 was one of those instances where I sent this idea to myself at that age and then ended up doing it later in life. And here we are, I guess. It's another one of those examples of what's called a consistency paradox, but it's not paradoxical at all, that you can have something create itself simply by sharing information across different periods of time. So to answer their question, I have tried to time travel, just not in the physical sense.
And that is something that anybody can actually do.
Absolutely.
It just takes discipline, and not even so much discipline as awareness mixed with discipline. And it's pretty interesting. She said that's cool. I think it is too.
And I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. I think everyone should try that. And certain people have more of a connection with their dreams than other people. I feel sad for people that don't dream at all or don't remember their dreams. We all obviously dream. But yeah, like I've had lucid dreaming experiences before. It's rare, and it hasn't happened for like 8 years, unfortunately. But there was a time when I would control what happened in my dreams, and it was just an amazing experience. And I think there's a lot we don't yet understand about our conscious and subconscious. And dreams, obviously, is a very understudied thing. But I think in the future we'll all hopefully get a better sense of what's going on, and even those people that don't dream might get that opportunity.
I have noticed that since this whole, I guess it's the stress from this stay at home, don't touch your grandchildren, don't be around, whatever, that I have not, and I am always aware of my dreams. I do dream journals. I have had no recall on any dream for over 2 weeks.
Huh.
And that's very odd. But it also is like my best friend is just, on vacation or something. Because I problem solve when I sleep too. So I miss that. It'll come back. But it's just I'm having trouble with meditation too. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, because I think that, again, I feel people's energy, and, that's actually a gift most of the time. It's not so much right now. So
the burden is a little heavier. Absolutely. I was told I'm an empath by some people. I've never really studied any of those things, but I've met a lot of people who are obviously much more open-minded than I am after publishing this book. And I feel like it's been great because I've gotten a better sense of self-awareness and different views on things that I've noticed my whole life, but didn't realize there were so many other people that experience the same things. And that sense of empathy, typically a good thing during difficult times, is somewhat traumatic.
Well, it just makes them feel more intense.
Yeah.
Because it's not just your difficult time.
Right.
But then again, when people are joyous and excited, that's great.
Yeah.
It's all about the balance, because it is balance. You were right.
It is. And even when, things aren't good, you're still providing a sense of solace or comfort to people who sometimes need it. And that can come at a cost to your own psyche, but it's still something that I think is therapeutic for people who might need it more than you.
I think so too. I think that I do consider that a gift, and from whatever source, it doesn't matter. But I feel like if you can help people, then you should do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at any rate, why don't you tell people how they can find you?
Stalking is probably the best way.
Well,
hide
you're
in
out
the
of
bushes.
school, so they can't find you at work. So.
Yeah, that's true. No, I've got a website. That's probably the best way to get in touch. It's just an abbreviated version of the title of the book, I'd Fly Obj, for identified flying objects, idflyobj.com, and it's got all the social media links and a contact page, and links to places where the book's available, and random merch like koozies and t-shirts, because I really liked that image that I mentioned earlier in the show that I saw when I was 8, so I started putting it on some t-shirts and things, and it's been kind of fun. And it's a good way of summarizing the idea too. You look at those 3 facial types together, and it sort of encapsulates the idea, I guess. But yeah, I'd Fly Obj is the name of the website, and the book's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and there's an audio book on iTunes.
Which you narrate.
Audible. Yeah, I did. It was a giant pain in the butt, but it was also a lot of fun. It took about 4 months to read that thing, and I probably read it like 6 times because I kept screwing things up and had to go back and re-record it. But no, it was kind of fun too. It was just a big project, and
it's a big book.
Yeah, it was. And there's a lot of words in there too, like not just scientific terms, but the names of Russian astronauts and physicists that I had to look up how to actually pronounce that. And I still butchered some, as it turns out. I would hear some said on TV later on. I'm like, oh man, I totally did not nail that when I read the book. But it was actually kind of a fun process, so I don't regret it.
Well, I am glad that you did it because I have enjoyed this book. And I actually quote you a lot when I'm guesting somewhere or when I'm having a conversation on this topic with one of my guests.
Oh, cool. Appreciate that.
Well, it's good stuff. You know, I'm very glad that I met you, and I'm very glad to learn from you. So thanks for that.
Yeah, me too. It's one of the best things about doing those events is just all the great people you meet, and all the different things that they're doing to just have a conversation and bring these things out into the public more. So I appreciate what you're doing in that respect as well.
Well, thank you. Well, hopefully I'll get to see you at events again soon.
Yeah, I know.
It is.
I was supposed to be in Alabama, actually in Huntsville.
Were you coming for the?
The Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. I was one of the speakers there. I was supposed to be speaking on.
I did not realize
this Sunday.
that. Yes.
No, that's true, but it's obviously, as with all of them, I think they are postponing it. I don't think they're outright canceling it. So hopefully I'll still get down there eventually. But it was hard. My administrative assistant booked all of the travel, which wasn't easy. It's not easy to get from southwest Montana to northern Alabama, but she worked it out. And then about a week later, had to cancel everything. But
I hope to be there. Rich Hoffman is somebody that I really enjoy. I've interviewed him several times.
Oh, yeah, he's great. He's a great guy.
He is great. So hopefully I will get to see you there.
Yeah, no, I look forward to that once everything gets back to normal. I'm hopeful that'll be one of the things that gets brought back as well. So,
well, I'm finding that some of the things that had to cancel this spring are rescheduling for events the same dates as events I'm already booked for next fall. So I'm kind of jiggling and juggling, trying to make that schedule work. So that would be a great conference. I hate that I missed last year's. I was recovering from an injury and trying to do events and go to events. That one was something I was going to go to just for me. So that's a great group of individuals.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to that one too, and I'm excited for the future because it's just such a great way of meeting people who are all trying to really get at the roots of what's happening here and figure it out using the scientific method and observational studies. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Great researchers. So, well, hopefully I'll see you there.
But hopefully.
Thank you so much. I am just thrilled to have had this conversation. I've been looking forward to it a lot. And
yeah, me too. It's great talking to you. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take a minute now here to tell our listeners that we are having a great week of shows this week. We have Denise Pridemore tomorrow night with the Paranormal Pride. I will be back on Wednesday with Paranormal Experience with Michael and Roz Lewis. Then Friday will be Shelley's replay. And we're going to do a little bit of a video show. This is my first time. Don't judge. And we'll see how that goes. I'm going to be playing with the software, so you never know when I'm going to show up online this week. So, again, don't judge. So, you know what? I know times are tough. I know it's kind of a, moment. People are starting to come out of their hidey holes. Hobbit holes is what somebody said the other day. And we've got experiments going on in Georgia. They're doing things. They're getting out of the house. I hope it goes well. Because then we'll follow them out into the sunlight blinking as we go. But I'm ready. I know y'all are. And just please continue to keep those who are still struggling with this illness and with the loss of people to it. And the recovery. The recovery is really, really hard. So just uplift them, keep them in your thoughts and prayers, and flow them with a little healing and energy. The universe and God know who needs that. So just toss it out there. And if you don't like attitudes or feelings or whatever that you're seeing, you can be that change. You can change your world. Just manifest that. Absolutely, you can do that. The mind is a powerful tool. So, use it. Thanks again. I hope that everyone has a great, great week. And Mike, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. You take care. Good night, everyone.
You too.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.